Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. On this episode, we are talking about how and why manufacturers' next technology investments could determine their long-term future, and why customer experience is such a key factor in today's landscape. My guest today is supply chain technology veteran Adam Robinson. He believes that manufacturers, as well as 3PLs and other organizations, have a unique opportunity to modernize their technology over the next few quarters to really position themselves for massive upcoming investments in the manufacturing marketplace. This episode is sponsored by Sana Commerce, and Adam and I discuss some of the challenges that lay between an organization's status quo and their vision for the future. Current events can help companies make smart investments, but we also look at examples of recent challenges that may end up taking the focus away from big picture planning, like supply chain disruptions, local economic issues, and of course, the pandemic. And from those national and global issues, we also bring the conversation back to the individual organization and why manufacturers ought to be planning investments in their customer relationships through better technology. Adam Robinson, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate kind of showing up and talking a little bit about technology, e-commerce, manufacturing, and supply chain. Always sexy and sexier than ever now than any time in history, I believe.
Yeah, I know you spend a lot of time with your work thinking about these things, and so it's great to have some fresh perspective. I'm really looking forward to getting into it here. I wanted to start maybe just talking about customer demand and what customers are demanding and how that's driving manufacturers to take action in different ways or make investments in different ways right now. What are some of those customer demands that you are seeing, and how is it reflected in manufacturers?
Yeah, I think when it came to customer demand, and particularly right alongside that are customer expectations, the reason that Amazon is so successful is because they really changed the entire consumer expectation, which in turn accelerated consumer demand. And so if you're now living in a society where many homes, let's say a mom and a dad have a daughter that needs something for school on Monday and it's Saturday and you didn't have the time to shop earlier than that, and you go look at Target and Walmart and they don't have the product, and you look at other websites and they can't get it to you till next Friday. Well, we now live in a society where we kind of know, just like, if I turn on the water faucet, that water's going to come out, that Amazon, I can turn there on a Saturday and get it maybe even that same day or even Monday morning before the daughter needs it for school. And so these kinds of changes in expectations are driving demand, but largely demand is being driven because the barriers to e-commerce are cheaper than ever. You can spin up a Shopify or WooCommerce or Magento e-commerce shopping cart in moments. There are multiple plugins and things and applications out there that can connect your shopping cart to shipping providers. So you can rate right within the shopping cart and provide the customer either free shipping if you choose to absorb that cost, or if you want to have the customer see the shipping cost and have them choose. And so, that consumer demand is not only driven by expectation, but as we stayed at home for the last year, we needed to still get stuff. And so a lot of us got really comfortable shopping online, where we wouldn't have before. When you needed to go into the store because you wanted to touch and feel, or maybe even try on clothes because you wanted to make sure it fits, you're starting to see companies like a Nordstrom, Target, and even Amazon, who are doing a really good job of making that process easier with the return logistics, so you can return it easily if it doesn't fit. And so when you go through a whole decade of changing consumer expectations that are driving more demand to make e-commerce more efficient, and then a year of forcing people to still want to buy things or need things and do it online, well, the demand is naturally going to sustain. And we've seen, obviously, the growth numbers in e-commerce, what they expected to happen over the next 7 years, happened in the 6-month period, largely after the periods of lockdown in March 2020. So it's a lot of demand out there. A lot of factors are in that. And it's a great opportunity for companies to try and respond to that if they can.
What have some of those shifts actually done to sort of the nature of some of businesses who are sort of adapting to changes in e-commerce? I'm thinking in terms of what has it done to their operations? What has it done to some of the sort of their financial profile or their financial performance, or changes in costing? Are there any trends that you're seeing in any of those areas?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it has to do with a couple of areas. One, primarily our margins, and we'll talk about that in a second. The other are what we should invest in as far as a tech stack and what their legacy tech stack looks like and maybe what they need to change to and how they make that work. So beyond the tech investment, just the resources to stitch it all together. But I think also manufacturers might be looking at different metrics, particularly when they have e-commerce, such as customer acquisition costs, customer lifetime value. And once you put in e-commerce, it's sometimes, in addition to that new tech stack, you're going to be able to have more data and more analytics perhaps than you ever had before as you digitize your supply chain, as you digitize your shopping experience. And so, naturally, some pure play e-commerce folks, if you look like at Casper or something like that, they're raising money and going out to investors based on those numbers. And the more you know about those things, the better. But when we, particularly on the manufacturing side, look at margins, there's an interesting story to tell there. When you're a manufacturer and you're traditionally going to wholesalers or retailers as your primary channel to, have your product be purchased, and you're used to standing up the LTL shipping or the full truckload shipping that may go to that distribution center of your wholesaler or your retailer, you kind of get used to those costs. And what e-commerce allows you to do is go directly to the consumer instead of giving up some of that wholesale cost or some of that margin to the wholesaler or the retailer. You get to keep that. And that actually, at the same time, concurrently, as shipping costs are going through the roof and adding to the cost of your goods sold, it's important that in order to kind of protect those margins and subsidize the increased cost in transportation, that you look at opportunities in e-commerce where your margin might be higher. And so that kind of approach, just like we diversify or we try to diversify our own income streams, when you diversify your shopping channels, you have the ability to play off each other financially and really with that data and analytics, put all of that together to have a better outlook and maybe some better control on your financial destiny.
When you put all those different factors together, I mean, it really has the potential to change very well-established businesses into something that perhaps they didn't think that they would have become a few years ago. And just from my own experience covering ERP and CRM in the Microsoft space, especially, 10 years ago, a lot of manufacturers, it seemed like, were real laggards when it came to their tech stacks, as you put it. Many of them had the option, based on the strength of their existing business, but their legacy business, I guess you'd say now, to put off some of those investments and sort of enjoy the continued sort of performance that some of that older economic model allowed. It's just not the case anymore. And even everything from valuation to, like you were saying, transportation is now in play.
Absolutely. And I think we're just creating smarter businesses. And is it a transformation? Absolutely. Is it most likely having to go back upstream and reorganize the way you go about operations and fulfillment and distribution and the way that you procure materials for manufacturing or how you work with vendors and the technology that helps get all of those people on the same page? Absolutely, it does. And so I think the next big focus for these companies is to start identifying what is that technology we need to do in order to take what I call, and many people in the industry call, an omni-channel supply chain approach. And, as manufacturers are starting to see the value in going direct to consumer to sort of control their own destiny when it comes to brand and margins and, proliferating their ability to get revenue in channels they hadn't gotten revenue before, the supply chain and logistics community where I, live every day is seeing an incredible infusion of venture capital and other investors putting into technology. And so, I've had the fortunate reality to work at some companies such as Turvo, where unlike a traditional transportation management system, as an example, they're really thinking beyond just the blocking and tackling of those processes. They're understanding that supply chains aren't just focused on transportation alone and executing there. They really are starting to consider, okay, what about our procurement side? What about our orders? What about our inventory? And how does that work collaboratively within a platform that's sort of like a Slack or a CRM or a social media network that I can build my entire network in a digital space and connect those through a platform like Turvo so that I not only can speak to my suppliers and vendors on the inbound side and procure that, but I can also connect that platform to my shopping cart and get visibility of anything from procurement all the way to the point of in delivery, and then bringing in carriers and service providers so that you can just have everything in one place and make it easier to go to market and feel like you're not losing control.
When it comes to e-commerce in the B2B context, I mean, I think most people understand that there are differences, but compared to what a consumer on Amazon experience is going to be. But I also think most people understand at this point that the consumer experience is sort of a very nice one, and B2B experiences should get close to that or should replicate it to some extent. I don't know. Do you agree with that? And if so, or if not, maybe what are some of the things that are in the B2B experience that are expectations right now that are moving investment in the manufacturers of the world?
Yeah, and I think that's why we're seeing the huge investment vehicles into the logistics and supply chain technology space. Because I think what we're saying here in that event is, well, just because you're a B2B, it doesn't mean that the expectations of the end buyer are any different. Largely, a B2B buyer is having a consumer lifestyle because they're a person. And it's hard to start separating, okay, I'm in business mode today and I'm purchasing some industrial parts, and then sort of try to trick your brain into thinking that should be a different experience. The reality is it can't be. And manufacturers who understand when you go to direct to consumer that you're controlling your own destiny, well, it should empower you then at that point to say, should we just do the bare minimum? Or should we take this opportunity to re-engineer our supply chain, re-engineer our approach to market by going omni-channel, understanding the purposes of each channel and where the buyers are for that channel? And how do we consistently create an experience in the logistics and supply chain and the buying experience that makes our brand stand out above our competitor? The reason that Amazon is so successful is not because they're a great brand or people actually love them. Amazon can do things like make horrible working conditions, and that's been known at some warehouses, or some of their drivers have felt pressure to deliver more than they should in a given 8-hour period. But despite all of those social issues and some of the chatter it gets in politics, Amazon has a 90% plus favorability rating. And I would argue that it's because of that experience. And so if you're a B2B manufacturer, I don't think you could go into the world as you're going online and say, well, we're not going to put as much effort in this. We're going to do the bare minimum. We know we need to do it, so we're just going to do it. And if you're going to take a half measure approach, I would actually say you maybe don't want to do that, because then you're at risk of harming your brand. You're at risk of people looking at you in a negative light. And we all know that customer acquisition is one of the more costly endeavors. And that if you're a manufacturer of apparel, for example, or footwear, and you create an amazing experience to that supplier, or they're able in that wholesaler environment to order bulk online, then they're going to continue to repeat purchase. And so customer lifetime value becomes a critical thing to want to improve, because those customer acquisition costs are rather expensive. And if you're churning your customers, your B2B buyers, and they go somewhere else, you have to work really hard to replace them. Wouldn't you rather them have that experience that's solid from the get-go so they can continue to repeat purchase and they become more profitable over time? Absolutely.
Do you find that organizations have trouble getting out of sort of the day-to-day focus of just execution and doing some of the planning that you just described? And I don't know, do you ever make recommendations on how to refocus or bring in that broader view?
I think having a technology provider really not just as an execution partner, but someone who's strategic, so demanding more of them. It's on the technology provider to tell you how all of this should work. And so you should say, look, I'm not here for tactics. I actually demand a strategic partner. Can you give that to me? Because here's what I'm trying to achieve. But before you ever go to that technology provider, I think it's important that you have internal stakeholders all on board with what we're trying to transform, and take that opportunity to go big. and think about your entire supply chain, your entire marketing, your entire customer service, and where you can apply new systems, new providers, or new technology to improve those. And as you go out, you say, hey, is there a technology provider that can get us more strategic? Is there a third-party logistics service provider that can help us with transportation? And often a lot of these 3PLs today who traditionally were helping for warehousing or distribution or transportation are starting to add more value to themselves because they understand that their shipper customers, the manufacturers, the retailers, et cetera, are having a lot of challenges. And if you're a service provider that can help solve some of those upstream supply chain problems that these customers are facing or help them stand up an initiative such as e-commerce or improving the customer experience, then that 3PL becomes stickier. So I think manufacturers need to know that the environment really is in their favor. Just like in real estate, we talk about buyers and sellers markets, right? If the market's good and prices are up, which they are right now, it's a seller's market. Buyers are paying more than the listing price, and there's a lot of cash buyers these days. And so you got to cater to the sellers, and the sellers are getting great equity and great margins and profit from their homes. But, that's the same thing with manufacturers and companies today. It's their market. Now, they may feel out of control. They may feel like it's not their market. But I know in this industry of the supply chain, at least, the 3PLs and the technology providers and the e-commerce companies that are adjacent to the supply chain folks, they're going to do whatever they can to get your business because they also have an opportunity right now to shine and help those companies overcome some of those challenges.
Can you say any more about the sort of the relationship between 3PLs and some of the technology that we've been talking about today, especially e-commerce? Is there a growing relationship there?
Yeah, absolutely. Because 3PLs understand that I don't want just a portion of your business. I'd really like to get a lot of your business. And so I have a lot of customers who are 3PLs. For example, I have some traditional 25, 20, 30-year-old companies who are in that space, and they're really struggling to, in the midst of what I would call the largest capacity constraint in the supply chain's history, no more evident than what we see with the Suez Canal or than what we saw over in China as COVID respiked over the last couple of weeks, where the ports are really having struggles finding labor to fulfill the demand there. Those 3PLs are really having a lot of struggle at transforming themselves. And there's a lot of these new digital 3PLs where they call themselves digital first. And what they're doing is they're investing in a very complete tech stack, not just to help in transportation management, but adopting, really good platforms that are cloud-based, SaaS-enabled, that integrate to all your shopping carts. They're able to advise on what your payment providers should be. They're able to help you re-engineer your carrier network by using data and analytics and predictive analytics, particularly to help understand at a more holistic level what your transportation spend might be so that you can financially plan. They're going to help you onboard new carriers that maybe you couldn't tap into because they're using digital freight matching platforms and digital freight aggregation platforms to kind of come back into the mega suite platform that's a transportation management system. And so some of these mega platforms like MercuryGate, Oracle, Turvo, who I mentioned earlier, they're going to do as much as they can to give you a turnkey solution from a technology standpoint for whatever you need. And that's where they're going to help those companies really pull that off. And so the relationship that a 3PL brings is that they've done the work at getting the best in breed technology. They do this every day. And so when you lean on them, you're not going into it blind. You're going into it with a partner who's already vetted out the best of the best, where you may not have that experience, because what the manufacturer needs to focus on is understanding who is my customer, what are my data and financials, where do I see opportunity, what have I learned from my traditional supply chain? And a 3PL already knows a lot of those questions to get out of the company that you may not be thinking about. So just in that initial onboarding and implementation phase, you're going to hear, a lot of questions that you may not have asked yourself in the past.
Are there other parties, players in the day-to-day operations of a manufacturer that are worth talking about here in the context of serving customers?
There's been a lack of, I think, strategic customer research. And, there are a lot of technology tools that can help marketers like myself better understand customers. But I think when you are going to make a change to your supply chain to take advantage of some of the opportunity that's out there, I think it'd be critical to sort of bring in a firm or do some sort of internal thing, which is really hard. But if you can bring in a firm that can tell you and dig deep with you what your customer really needs. What are they hearing in the marketplace? Now, as some advertising agencies do this and marketing agencies do this, there are some specialists that do this where you can really get your customer data together and really intimately understand what the customer is feeling. And when you bring that to that next step, the third-party logistics provider or the technology provider, as you head to e-commerce, you're better informed to tell that 3PL exactly what you need or what your customer is wanting so that you can stand up a supply chain that meets the customer where they are.
I know that you recently spoke to an event that Sonic Commerce, who's making this podcast possible. You spoke to some of them and their audience recently in a presentation. Were there any other topics or points that you were raising for them that you wanted to mention here that we haven't yet touched on?
Well, I just think that there are a lot of opportunities into direct to consumer. And you can rewatch that keynote that I gave by going to sana-commerce.com and under the About Us, clicking events. And so one of the things that I did there is I gave what I kind of spoke about earlier was you need to have these 5 things, and that's in that recording there, and you should be able to see it, to think about before you ever go to direct consumer. And then there were 8 steps that I outlined there to talk about how you actually pull that off. And so, I think that largely you don't want to get ahead of your skis. That was the main point that I made there. You can see opportunity in front of you, but often, just like a job interview, that first impression is critical. So you need to put some time and effort and consideration and strategic work and align the right technology and the right tools and get stakeholders on board in the company to make a serious, full measure effort at making the direct to consumer aspect of your business seamlessly integrate to other aspects of your business. And when all of those things work together, a magical thing happens. You have profit, you gain market share, you have happy customers. Customers advocate and do word of mouth, which is the best kind of marketing. You can then pivot your own marketing to start including those customer quotes and testimonials. And so the thing that happens is revenue. The thing that happens then is because you've done all of the work to make it efficient and invest in the right technology, your profit margins are higher, your customer acquisition costs are lower, and the customer lifetime value continues to increase.
Yeah, it's certainly not a small endeavor, but as you just mentioned, there's certainly some very specific ways to measure your success, and that then opens the door to a whole lot of other important opportunities in the tech stack in terms of capturing that data, being able to evaluate it on a daily, weekly, quarterly basis to really assess how well you're performing with these types of initiatives.
Yeah. And, I'm not here to say that it's easy. It's definitely, as you said, an endeavor. But with that data and analytics portion, once you're up and running and things are optimized, it actually can get pretty boring, which is not a bad thing in business. You can predict, you can scale, and you can actually find where in your organization you need resources to continue to see the numbers that you want to see. And largely, it's going to be in that labor side and as you grow. And so when your revenue's there and your profit margins are improved, and then you say, oh, we have a labor issue, you can then start working on the other aspect of experience, and that's employee experience and making a great company and attracting the top talent. And that's just all a part of growth. But you need that revenue. You need those profits to fund that kind of growth. And so when you do all of those things right and that profit margin's healthier, then all the stakeholders feel very comfortable at investing in other areas of the business that will only improve that go-to-market strategy. Because my kids and these future generations are only really going to do business with companies they think or are perceived as actually good. And I think even Amazon is going to have to start at some point, as the competition heats up for them, to think about that warehouse workers day, to think about that driver's day. And so, those are big issues that any company are going to have to face in the course of doing business. But when revenue and profit's there, it makes all of that a little bit easier to handle.
Well, very interesting stuff. I mean, do you have any, predictions or things you're on the lookout for moving ahead that hasn't totally come into focus yet?
I can say that what is great about being a manufacturer right now is there is an army of venture capitalism standing up the supply chain and logistics technology future, and that the options to go to market are easier than ever. And there's a small window of opportunity over the next 12 to 18 months that if you haven't stood up e-commerce or direct to consumer or some sort of digital way you go to market, start doing it now. Because in 2 to 3 years, I think it'll be so saturated that we're going to see a lot of mega acquisitions, particularly, I think, in the furniture and mattress side, because we've all seen the explosion of different brands there. But that'll only continue in every sector. And so if your goal is to get acquired or sell, then start doing these things now. It'll make you more acquirable. If you want to be the acquirer and start gobbling up competitors, then this is a great opportunity for you to, increase that endeavor. So I would say that is my prediction, is that it's going to get quite saturated 2 years from now, and it'll be even harder to make this move. So if you're waiting, I would really, suggest that you stop waiting and keep going to market.
Very interesting. Well, Adam, it's been really fun getting a chance to talk to you and hear your perspective on this. Thank you so much for taking the time today. Anything else you wanted to add?
Well, thanks for having me, Jason. I really love to talk about this stuff. So, if anybody ever wants to reach out to me, probably the best way is to go to Twitter, Adam Robinson, C as in Charlie, D as in digital, M as in marketing. So Adam Robinson, CDM. And I'm always putting out content around these kinds of specific topics. So check me out there if you want to continue to get more information from me.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Adam.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. It was great. Good talking to you.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks to Adam Robinson for joining me and to Sonic Commerce for sponsoring. For more information on the B2B e-commerce seminar mentioned in this episode, check out the links in the show notes, as well as a link to a related white paper called A Path for Manufacturing Advancement. And that's it for this episode. If you want to reach me with feedback or ideas for future episodes, you can send me an email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. And please look for us on LinkedIn and Twitter for all our latest articles, events, and more. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.